tutti. What's the scoop? Episode number 19, Saturday night, 9 p.m. Eastern time. Uh, Great to see everybody on tonight. Looking forward to seeing everybody and engaging with what y'all are thinking tonight regarding everything that's happening in sports right now. One of the best times of the year, sports wise. We've got Major League Baseball kicking off right now. We've got March Madness, which, if your bracket isn't busted already, I don't know exactly how you did that, because mine's about as useful right now only as a coaster for my coffee. So, but all of this, we've got NFL draft talks in the trades and combine and pro day, all of that kicking into another gear as we head up to the draft about a month from now. Trades are already being made. We're hearing speculation regarding more trades every day. Every sport you can think of is seems to be in one form or another in full gear right now. So looking forward to getting into it with y'all. And as every week, Mr. David Burns says, watching from Cedar Hill, Texas. Mr. Burns, you're always on every week. I appreciate it. Hope you're doing well. Hope you had a great week, sir. So just going into it right now. Well, first, I want to lead off with something that happened today, at least that came down today. And I just want to say, send my condolences and prayers up to the Baltimore Orioles family. Their owner, Peter Angelos, longtime owner, passed away this morning, age 94. So my prayers up to the Baltimore fan base and to all the loved ones of Peter Angelos, and rest in peace to him. And so just wanted to start off the show with saying that. Going forward, I think if you're following Major League Baseball this past week, you probably know where I'm going to be starting the show off with this. Probably the face of Major League Baseball, new LA Dodgers, I'll say player, because he's obviously both a pitcher and a batter, even though he won't be pitching this year. Shohei Ohtani was currently is embroiled in a controversy that has led to a Major League Baseball investigation surrounding the placement of illegal bets made by his now former interpreter, named Ippei. I want to make sure I'm pronouncing this name correctly. The name Ippei Mizuhara. He was fired earlier this week after it became public that he was accused of engaging in a, quote, massive theft of Ohtani's funds to place bets with an allegedly illegal bookmaker who was the target of a federal investigation. This is according to a report from the LA Times that came out on Wednesday afternoon, to be specific. The report goes on to state that a quote from West Hollywood law firm Burke Brettler says, in the course of responding to recent media inquiries, we discovered that Shohei has been the victim of a massive theft, and we are turning the matter over to the authorities. So, obviously, as of right now, that remains ongoing. Major League Baseball subsequently announced that they're launching an investigation into that whole situation. There's obviously, as there always is throughout the media, there's been a myriad theories that have come out already as to how much Ohtani knew. Did Ohtani authorize the use of the funds, but not the specific purpose for which they were ultimately used? Did he not know at all that the funds were being used? This whole question as to what Ohtani knew, and of course, because that's what people love to do, you got people who are automatically saying that Ohtani is going to automatically come off innocent for this because MLB needs to protect him. Just kind of automatically baking in the fact that Ohtani must have done or said something wrong. All of this, and then you got the whole everyone's trying to tie this into the Pete Rose situation from decades ago and all this. So I'm going to reserve, commenting on, my personal side of a lot of this for right now, only because, again, it's very early in the investigation and I don't want to jump the gun on anything that hasn't been either confirmed or, that we don't have facts wise. So I'll be sharing a little bit about what's been going on for the people who haven't heard, but as far as my own personal side of things that I usually share, I'm going to reserve most of that for right now as the situation plays out. But the situation at hand basically, said that Mizuhara was not truthful regarding his involvement and his handling of the funds. there's not been any charge of an official crime right now, and there's been, obviously, as there usually is, a lot of denials and a lot of this, that, or the other. This is part of same report that I was referring to earlier. Says the investigation into Boyer also involves the same prosecution team that has targeted a multi-million-dollar illegal sports gambling scheme anchored in Orange County, California. And this is that, for those who are aware of it, this ties into another former Dodger player, Yasiel Puig. That's the situation that he was implicated in and has since pled not guilty. That came out several months prior. So as of right now, again, a lot of allegations, a lot of denials, a lot of complaints about misrepresentation, one thing or the other. As of right now, pardon me, most of what we actually know is pretty much what that report said. The first facts that came out were that was $4.5 million was in question regarding losses, and the report said that initially that Ohtani willingly paid off those losses, of over $4.5 million for Mizuhara. What's important to note right now, Ohtani has not been accused of placing any sort of bets. In fact, there was one source from the LA Dodgers, an anonymous player, who basically said that Ohtani pretty much never pays attention to sports outside of baseball and pretty much never pays attention to other teams aside from his own. So there's a pretty widespread belief within Major League Baseball, it seems, and the media, that he is not likely to have done any sort of nefarious or sinister activity here. Mizuhara was quoted, or according to ESPN, Mizuhara, quote, said that he got in over his head and then asked Ohtani for help paying off his debts, and then worked with Ohtani to wire money to a bookmaker who had allowed the wagers to be placed on credit. But soon after Mizuhara spoke with ESPN, a spokesman for Ohtani recanted the account, said that Ohtani had not been aware of his gambling activity. So again, like I said, we're tossing around a bunch of speculation right now. So I'm not going to read a ton of more reports because they're pretty much all saying a lot of that right now. But that's, for those who haven't heard, that's pretty much the gist of what we're dealing with right now. Mr. Burns says the Cowboys didn't get no one good. Yeah, objectively, I have to agree with that. I know I'm going to sound biased as a diehard Eagles fan, longtime Eagles fan, but I have to agree with that. I didn't think that the Cowboys have done anything particularly impressive this week, and I thought that obviously when you lose Leighton Vander Esch, Tyron Smith, et cetera, doesn't really look like a great net week for Dallas, although the media is probably going to try and spin it into something better than it is. Mr. Burns says, I want to thank Pete for loving Baltimore for 30 plus years and giving Baltimore Camden Yards and keeping it one of the best ballparks for baseball for so long. Yeah, Mr. Burns, completely agree with you. In fact, I've heard many people tell me that Camden Yards is either the best place stadium-wise in Major League Baseball, or at least is up there with places like PNC Park. I have not personally been to Oriole Park at Camden Yards, but it definitely is on my bucket list. Kurt Valenti, how you doing, buddy? Kurt says, what's up, Scoops? MLB has a major problem. Face of MLB in big-time trouble. Yep, I just spoke about that and kind of try to make some of the differentiations between where the heat is right now on Ippei Umehara, or sorry, I don't want to mispronounce his name. Pardon me. Ippei Mizuhara, versus Ohtani. Again, Ohtani seems to not really be in the spotlight right now. Seems to really not be in the at the center of this right now. Obviously, he'll be at the epicenter of things just because of his name and because of his level of status within the game and the fact that he just signed that contract. But there's pretty much nothing aside from his association with Ippei Mizuhara that indicates right now that Ohtani has any sort of sinister or nefarious connection to the activity that allegedly took place. But as more comes out, obviously we'll be covering it, regularly as the show continues in future weeks. But I also don't want to get too into the speculation game because plenty of other media outlets have done that, and I don't think that's particularly fair. David Burns says, Tyrone Smith went to the Jets. Glad he went to the Jets. Yep, so am I. I heard a report a couple weeks ago that said he was not likely to return to Dallas. I believe I mentioned it on the show when it occurred. glad to see that that's the case. And for all the talk that, I've been seeing a lot of Eagles fans, talking about Saquon and one thing or another. I think our bigger acquisition so far has been Bryce Huff, also from the Jets. I think we really needed to shore up that side of the D line. There's been reports about Sweat being traded. There's been reports about Reddick being traded. There's repeated reports that at least one of our edge D linemen is not going to return. And you've already lost Cox off that line. So I think bringing in someone like Huff is really going to potentially be impactful. So I, as psyched as I am about Saquon, and don't get it twisted, I'm extremely excited about that. I think if you're actually looking at it as who I think will be more of an impact for the Eagles this year, I think of the two, it's probably going to be Bryce Huff. My personal opinion as of right now, looking at it from 30,000 feet. Dave says, I hope this waking Jerry Jones up right now to get someone to replace him. Yeah, again, I've spoken ad nauseum on the show for a while about Jerry Jones and my belief that he is, I think one of the biggest mistakes that he made in his whole career, and I know I'm far from alone on this, is letting go of Jimmy Johnson and kind of self-anointing himself the winner of that whole ego battle back then. Again, I know that they both have very big personalities, but the fact of the matter is Jimmy Johnson came in. He was the reason behind the Herschel Walker trade. He was the reason behind the players that they drafted and the 51 trades that they made, which is more than the entire league combined during that few years. The fact of the matter is they ain't done nothing since since Jimmy Johnson left. I think Jimmy Johnson is one of the greatest coaches ever, especially because, again, what he did as both a coach and a GM, he was great at both sides of it. A lot of guys are great at either picking players. A lot of guys are great at coaching the game. The fact that he was so good at both is just not something that you see every day. And, other than really Belichick for a period of time, we really haven't seen much of that in the past 20 years. So, yeah, again, I think that Jones, obviously, because of the brand that Dallas has and because of, the stadium and, the crazy fans and all of this, like, he's going to be sort of the epicenter of that. But from a pure football standpoint, I mean, he's sticking with this, the Stephen Jones and all that, this sort of nepotistic family and friends, the people who are going to, work under his thumb. Basically, it's, a big reason why Mike McCarthy is still there, as opposed to bringing in one of these guys who may have had a stronger effort to have a bigger impact on the day-to-day operation from a football standpoint. As an Eagles fan, obviously, I think that it's obviously good for the division, the way that they operate right now. But from the standpoint of Dallas football-wise, and aside from the business side of things, I don't think that it's really advantageous for them to continue to have Jerry Jones there. But, of course, he's not going to fire himself. So I think that they just have to wait that one out until he ultimately steps down or sells the team or whatever it ends up being. But I doubt that either of those are going to happen. So, Dallas, I think, is probably destined for a time period of mediocrity for a few years now, especially now they're talking about doing a new deal for Dak, which God knows what that's going to look like. But if these reports that I heard are true, that he ends up getting up there with $50-60 million, I think Jerry Jones has to, if he's not right now, which I don't think he is, because I know you've got guys like Haslam and the guy in Arizona and several guys up there who are ranked as worse than him. I think if he ends up committing $60 million a year to Dak Prescott, and I love Dak as a person, I think Jones is legitimately squarely in the conversation at that point for worst owner in the NFL, because that nothing that I've seen over the last couple of years indicates to me that he's worth that from a football standpoint. I don't think he's worth his deal now, let alone a pay raise. Like unless you've just given up on trying to win in the playoffs, which in my opinion, what are you getting out of bed for in the NFL if you're not trying to win playoff games? But unless he's just completely written that off, then I don't understand what doing a new deal for Dak, especially at a higher level when he's already an overpaid player. I don't get it. Credit to the New York Giants. I don't credit the New York Giants a lot, but credit to the New York Giants. At least the reports the last couple of days that I've been hearing say that they're looking to potentially move on from Daniel Jones and just try and just fish and cut bait with the awful deal that they've got with him. Where they overpaid him. So at least to their credit, they're at least not doubling down on a dumb mistake. They're at least going forward and trying to keeping an open mind about potentially trying to rectify a mistake that they made. I've been saying for a while, I think the Giants should seriously target a quarterback at 6 overall, but going forward and at least looking at this and saying, you know what, we may have made a mistake. Let's take the L and move on. I at least respect that a lot more than I do just doubling down on something to try and save face. I'd rather save my team than save face personally, but that's just me. I'm not Jerry Jones, who has made a living off of being a mediocre sports team owner. David Burns says, "What are your thoughts on Caleb Williams coming to the Chicago Bears?" All right. So in the past, I've said, and I'm not saying that I've fallen off of this. I'm just reiterating what I've said before. I'm not a Caleb Williams guy in terms of my QB1 in this draft. If I were taking a QB and I wanted the best QB off the board, I'd be taking Jayden Daniels. I'm sure Kurt's going to disagree with me on that, but I'd be taking Jayden Daniels. I've watched tape of this guy. I've gone through his testing and his numbers about this, that, and the other, and basically everything that has a strong correlation from college to translating to success in the NFL. Pretty much the metrics that have the strongest correlation of that, I've pretty much reviewed them all. And Daniel Jones, Jayden Daniels, excuse me, has easily the best projection there, I think, in terms of to success in the NFL. And so, and then again, I brought this up recently, but adding on to that, the down year from Caleb Williams projection wise, the issues that he's apparently had from, in interviews or personality standpoint, and this sort of diva that I guess persona that he kind of apparently, this aura that he gives off, that's just too much for me. I mean, when was the last time we heard of a QB that had that label attached to him that it worked out ultimately well for the team that drafted him that high? I mean, Jameis Winston, excuse me. Sorry about that. Jameis Winston, when he was drafted by Tampa Bay, he had a couple of great years. He had 1 year where he led the league in TDs. Of course, he also led the league in picks that year. Johnny Manziel, going back 12 years now. Josh Rosen, which I was one of the few people who didn't like that selection that the Cardinals made, and sure enough, they gave up on him pretty quickly. He bounced around as a backup to the Dolphins and a couple other teams. I was not in on these guys. I think that when you hear these things, they come out for a reason, and I can't remember the last time that I heard that connection to somebody. That was also tied into a recent quarterback. It was either Matt Corral or Sam Howell. I can't remember which. But obviously, both of those quarterbacks have since been moved off of from their teams as well. So when I hear that, especially with a QB that's been, the media has been kind of boosting him on their backs for as long as they have with Williams, I ain't touching that with a 1,000-foot pole. I'm taking my guy Jayden Daniels and running with that. I would not have traded Justin Fields to begin with. I would have traded the number 1 pick, built up a nice swath of draft picks, and built up that offense, continue to build up that offense around Justin Fields and turn him loose this year. And if that doesn't work out, then at least next year you can, reset the clock on a new QB with an actual, treasure trove of options around him. So that's what I would have done. Either that, or I would have kept the first pick and drafted a non-QB. Probably would have gone Marvin Harrison Jr. there. I think he's the best prospect in the draft. But again, teams, whether you agree with it or not, teams are just not going to draft wide receivers first overall for positional value reasons, which I get. But I also think that there are some times where a guy's talent makes it possible that you can supersede that. Obviously, it's anybody's personal opinion based on what they evaluate and how they evaluate whether or not Marvin Harrison Jr. Would reach that level. Now, another component to his situation, Harrison's situation, is there's been increasing reports the last few days about Malik Nabers coming up and potentially being in contention against Marvin Harrison Jr. for being the first wide receiver off the board. I personally don't see that. I'm definitely someone who values Harrison Jr. as a wide receiver one ahead of Malik Nabers. Apparently, some teams don't feel that way. Either that or it's posturing to, try and shake the board up a little bit in, one team's favor or another, whatever it is. So I think that it's mostly probably pre-draft, smoke BS. I don't particularly see that having been substantiated a lot. I think that a lot of teams should and do still pretty consistently view Harrison Jr. as the wide receiver one, but that is something to look at going forward over the next month. Is does Malik Nabers get the amount of helium in whether it's his workouts, whether it's whatever he did in after the combine, whether it's interviews, or whether it's just these guys going back and sort of overanalyzing things with tape and kind of overthinking it a little bit, that leads them to kind of second guess what to a lot of teams apparently has seemed pretty consistent for some time now. David Burns says, so glad Justin Fields gone to the Steelers. Yeah, I just talked about that. I would not have traded him if I were Chicago. And obviously that led to Kenny Pickett coming over to Philadelphia. Philadelphia also just picked up another quarterback today. Will Grier went over to Philly. He'll be the QB3 presumably. But I think Pittsburgh's a very good opportunity for Fields to sit behind Russell Wilson. Now, when I mentioned last week, there's a bit of there's kind of a discrepancy in my mind now as to how they plan to you have both of those guys going forward. Because again, if they report last week is accurate and they intend on extending Russ, I don't exactly know what they envision Justin Fields for, unless they literally just were like, if he gets hurt this year, meaning if Russ gets hurt this year, then we'll have Fields and then we'll flip him next year, or whatever the case may be. I don't know what the mindset was there, but if the intent really was to extend Russ and have him be there for the back nine of his career or whatever he's on right now, probably back 4 or 5 at this point, then I don't really know exactly. There's been some speculation that they want to use Justin Fields as some sort of a gadget player, like a Tebow or a Taysom Hill type. I think that's really shortchanging Fields' ceiling there. I think I don't think it would be a bad. I don't think that it would be a bad role for him in terms of I think he'd be able to handle it, but I also just think that you're not going to be able to get the best use of all of his skills in something like that. I feel like that just limits him and kind of delegitimizes him as a passing QB, which I think is still unfair based on what he had to overcome in Chicago. Says Michael Penix is a good pick for QB for the Bears. Whether or not they would have chosen him had they not moved off of Caleb Williams, I'm not sure. There's been some speculation that maybe the Bears double dip at QB. Maybe they take Caleb Williams and they take another guy later. But I'm not sure I see Michael Penix falling to their pick in the second round. And I think going QB at 1 and 9 would just be insane. So I agree with you that it could be an interesting fit had they not gone Caleb Williams. Since they are, I'm struggling to see if that would really be something that they would do. Because again, I don't think he falls to their pick in the second round. And I think that double dipping at QB in your 1 and 9 picks, when you have many other needs, particularly on offense, I'm not sure that I see that in this current situation fitting as smoothly. Already, Caleb calls himself don't want to play for the Bears, but he has no choice. Yeah, again, I know I've mentioned this before. I've said that a lot of times this episode, but I know that I've talked about the fact that there's been a lot of reports and discussion and discourse in the public that he does not want to play for Chicago, doesn't want to play in Chicago, wants to play for the Commanders, which, again, I don't know if that's being a Commanders fan. I don't know if it's just not wanting to play in Chicago. I don't really know a ton of the details there behind that, but it is something that I've heard. Don't know how legitimate it is, obviously, and obviously we won't, because Caleb, I think, is at least smart enough to know that you can't really mess up your image this quickly and do something like that. I know that there is precedent for that with guys like Eli Manning and Phillip Rivers and Elway, 41 years ago, I think it was. But I don't know. I would have a really hard time seeing if Caleb Williams had come off of a year that really ended his college era with a bang, then maybe I could see that. And if he hadn't just, made a jerk of himself apparently multiple times, then maybe I could see that being a little more like him having that in his pocket. But this kind of reminds me of like when guys who are like backups or third stringers like publicly request a trade. Like, come on, like in my mind, that's something like I remember when I was 11. I remember Ichiro Suzuki in Major League Baseball requesting a trade from the Mariners to the Yankees. He had played baseball in Major League Baseball for over a decade. He had been one of the best players, one of the most loyal players, one of the most respected players on one of the crappiest teams for over 10 years. And only at that point, and when he got to the point where he saw a lot of players in their early 20s and he was of advanced age at that point, only at that point did he say, I think it's best that I move on. We got guys now who, and I know that the same conversation happens with like the transfer portal. Guys saying, you should go in there and compete and not, if you don't get the starting job, not, transfer 7 times. Now, I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole because that's a whole other conversation, but I do see the parallels there. But again, my mindset, as I said with Justin, is, you play where you get drafted, and then there's a reason why free agency exists once you earn that down the road. But, I would have an issue with the way Caleb's last year to year-ish has gone. I would have an issue seeing him basically just, publicly say, I'm not playing for Chicago. But again, that's his, if you want to call it his right, I guess. I even have a reluctance saying that, but that's a choice that he can, in a literal sense, he's able to make. I'll put it that way. But only time will tell on that one. Caleb has an attitude. I don't care how good he is. The Bears shouldn't want him. Now he's acting like that. Yeah, again, not my QB1. Not a fan of his attitude, not a fan of his personality. Not a fan of the fact that he, again, for me, the nail painting and the crying and all that, those things I don't have an issue with. I think that I know that there are people who have issues with those. To me, those are non-issues. I really could care less about that. Frankly, I don't mind my QB showing emotion if it actually shows their passion for winning and stuff and their teammates and stuff like that. Like that, I don't mind. If it's that type of showing emotion, I don't mind that. And I can find it favorable in some cases. But with the stuff that I've seen and heard that's going on, that's not related to those things. Again, suffice it to say, if Philadelphia did not have Jalen Hurts and they were picking first overall and they needed a QB, I would not want them taking Caleb Williams. I would roll the dice on letting him go somewhere else. And there was a quote, I can't remember who the quote is from. I don't know if it was even Football to which it was applying, but there's a quote that says, you'd rather have a player be a success elsewhere than an albatross on your team. And I mean, pick your choice in terms of my favorite teams having seen that, whether it was the Yankees with Jacoby Ellsbury, whether it was the Eagles a decade ago with Nnamdi Asomugha, whether it was, whoever you want to look at. I think that, obviously that happens very frequently, but it's something where I would roll the dice on letting him go to another team and potentially being good there than me rolling the dice and potentially having to deal with an absolute headache at the most important position and most influential position, perhaps in all of sports, forget just football. So I agree with you completely, Mr. Burns. Not someone that I would take the chance on. I'm hoping that Jaden Daniels goes somewhere great, and I'm hoping it's not Washington because I do not want to root against him twice a year. And obviously, I'll have to do that if he goes to the Commanders. So, shout out to Coach Brislin, one of the biggest Commanders fans that I know, who's often on the show. So, if you are on the show, Coach, I hope you're doing well, and if you're not, I hope that you have a good weekend, and then I'll see you again soon. So, moving forward from that, not seeing any further comments in the chat right now. I'll kick forward. We spoke a little bit on. I talked about the Ampani thing. I talked a little bit about draft trade reports coming up. There was a public statement made today by Commanders. Speaking of the Commanders coach Dan Quinn. Actually, speaking of both the Commanders and former Cowboy coaches, which I alluded to earlier. Dan Quinn says the Commanders have received calls for the number 2 pick, but it's fair to envision we take a QB. He did not specify that would occur with the second pick. However, I think that most people, don't need magnifying glasses to determine that that's likely what he was referring to. There's been a lot of discussion as to whether or not that pick would be Drake May or Jaden Daniels. Again, as once again, I'll say, if anyone's, playing take a shot, the amount of time Scoop talks about Jaden Daniels, and here's another one for you. If I were the Commanders at number 2, I would take Jaden Daniels. And if I were the Patriots at 3, frankly, I wouldn't take Drake May. Say that 3 times fast. I would take Marvin Harrison Jr., the wide receiver, and I would roll the dice on getting a QB later in the draft. I know that, if you don't have a QB, I know very little else matters, but I don't have the hype on Drake May that a lot of others do, and none of the other QBs really wet my whistle enough to the point where I would say, I definitely think that this would be the right guy to take if I'm New England. Again, this is assuming that Daniels goes to the Commanders. At that point, I don't think that any of the other QBs really, wet my beak enough to get the number 3 pick automatically, whereas Marvin Harrison Jr. definitely does in terms of just a game-changing prospect. So I would take him at number 3 if I were New England in that scenario where Daniels is gone. And then I would roll the dice on another QB later on, whether that's taking a shot on Rattler, whether that's, whether that's if someone falls like a Penix or a Bo Nix or whoever. Again, I don't see any of the top 6 QBs making it out of the top half of the first round. So this would likely involve a trade back up into the first round for New England. But that in that scenario, that's how I would play it if I were New England. You can put a game-wrecking prospect, in my opinion, on that roster, and then give I think that your drop-off in value going from whoever they can get at QB, provided those 2 off the board, whoever you can get a QB at number 3, and whoever you can get a QB at your next pick, I think that drop-off is less than the drop-off between Marvin Harrison and the next, non-QB that you would take at another pick. So I think you always have to evaluate that as well in terms of what's the drop-off in value between the next time that you're either on the board or could realistically be on the board. That's another thing that I really factor in a lot when I'm making my mock drafts, which I have mine in progress right now. Haven't gone too far into it because, again, we just saw the Vikings shake up the board with their trade the other day. So that's one reason why I haven't done too much on it. I usually get more into that as April comes around, and that sort of second into third wave of free agency has kind of passed through. So I'm not really 100% sure how I would envision New England to look at that. But from my vantage point, I would rather go for the position where I feel like I can get not only the best player, but also the best value at that, which again, that's the kind of the combination of that whole, traditional method versus analytics, that whole thing that I always talk about and that Kurt and I would always butt heads about, is I think you kind of have to think of it from both perspectives if you really want to have the best chance to succeed. Because I think that teams that are only looking at it from an analytical perspective, like the Browns were doing for a little while, I think they missed a lot. And I think teams like the Tennessee Titans that have recently not been entertaining analytics at all and notoriously not really incorporating sabermetric approach at all, I think they're really missing a lot as well. So I think you got to blend those two approaches, and I think that that's kind of one of the ways that you do it. And I would rather have that because I don't want to run the risk of not being able to get the best possible draft class that I can get, because this is obviously my one shot to improve my team with young talent going forward and cost-controlled talent. The other thing being, because obviously free agency and trades and whatnot, you're either giving up players, you're giving up draft picks, you're giving up a crap load of money. This is your one chance to really nail it. And especially in the first round, you get that extra option. So, it's really a chess game. And I think that that's something that sometimes gets understated is, are you getting not just what position are you getting a guy, if it's a quarterback versus not a quarterback, but what is his ability to really impact your board, but also how much is the drop off between the next guy you could get the next time you come up? Because I think that drop off is significantly more from Harrison to who plan B could be than it is from the best quarterbacks, presumably Drake May, best quarterback on their board at number 3, provided those first 2 are gone, to whoever they could get next. I don't find that drop off to be as significant at all. And Drake May is also significantly lower on my board than he is on most for what it's worth. I don't anticipate that on my mock draft. I don't anticipate he'll go even 3rd, 4th quarterback off the board, to be honest. So going back to the report that I started on with Dan Quinn, so that had come out regarding his statements. The Vikings, I mentioned kind of in passing, they made that trade with the Texans for the 23rd pick after Kirk Cousins was lost to free agency. They kind of, I guess you'd kind of call it maybe, according to one person from ESPN, called it basically almost like a smoke signal as to potential ability and willingness, now that they have 2 first rounders, to jump up again to get a QB even higher. I don't think that any team in the top 4 is likely to be entertaining moving down if they think that they can get to a team like perhaps the Chargers at number 5, because that's also a team that I kind of have a hard time seeing exactly what they'll do right now. They could go Bowers at the tight end, but I'm not sure if they'll. Again, I think some teams, and I don't know if the Chargers is one of them, but I think some teams are reluctant to have a tight end be drafted in the top 5 overall. We saw what happened with Kyle Pitts in Atlanta. However, some of that obviously was his usage by then coach Arthur Smith. But pardon. So, and then there's options. If they didn't go Brock Bowers at the tight end at that position, could be someone like Joe Alt to put up some protection in front of Justin Herbert in a year where he may have more to prove than any quarterback in the NFL behind Josh Allen, which again, I know that Allen had a very good year last year, but Buffalo's not paying you to, beat the Jets in week 13. Buffalo's paying you to beat the Chiefs in the AFC Championship game, and you have not done that. And again, a couple of those times it was his defense that let him down. But he's getting paid that money. He's getting basically put as the 1A or the 1B rather to Pat Mahomes. Let me see it. Show me the money. Show me what you can do. Cause right now the amount of hype that he's getting, I'm seeing all these guys where people are calling for guys' jobs because they haven't won past a championship game or past a couple of early round games. And Josh Allen I'm looking at and seems to be getting every mulligan, every get out of jail free card, whatever you want to say, that exists. So I'm not exactly sure why, but I think that that's something important to look at as well. If your LA is trying to give Herbert now with this new regime, and of course Coach Harbaugh giving them the best opportunity to show where he's at right now in terms of his ability to lead the Chargers not only in the regular season but going into big games in January. Pardon. That was kind of really the only significant report regarding a potential move that has already happened. Back to the chat, got Mr. Burns again saying, can't wait for the opening day of MLB season to start next week. Yeah, that was a really interesting game for anybody who didn't watch it this past week. Really interesting game. They had the opening series in Seoul between the Dodgers and the Padres, and I've never seen this before. I didn't even know it was possible from a standpoint of how the gloves work, or from a standpoint of the fact that anything that's existed since Isaac Newton, and the challenging the laws of physics from this. But the ball that was hit to the fielder, and the ball, for those, just go watch the video on X, YouTube, wherever, the ball goes through his glove. It looked like I was playing MLB The Show, and there was an animation glitch, and the ball just goes right through. I mean, anybody who's played that game or any video game knows that the animation glitches sometimes. That's what it looked like. It did not look like something that happened in real life. And I've watched it 4 or 5 times now. I do not understand how this happened. But it was definitely an interesting way to open the season. There's also there was another play where there was a stolen base, and there was I think it was second base, and there was a runner who was thrown out, but he's ruled safe because this is a new rule, and this kind of was swept under the rug and kind of slipped past some people. Combined 2 sentences there. That you are no longer, there's been for a while the discussion about blocking the plate in one thing or another. Now this fielder, because he was not able to, by new rules, block the bag to the extent that he was, so he basically, apparently was obstructing the runner too much from getting to second base. Now, I love stolen bases. I love, the small ball game. I love the sort of, the station to station, all of that. But the over regulation of sports is driving me freaking insane. And it's making it like, you get instant replay. Somehow you can't use instant replay in the 8th or 9th inning of a baseball game for a lot of things, or in the final 2 minutes of NFL games for a lot of things. It goes up to the booth or whatever. It goes up to New York or God knows what. For all of these times that we have instant replay and we can't use it, but we can use these rules for something this ridiculous that I don't see how improves the play of the game at all. Like, we talk about bringing in fans. I'm not sure how many fans the Dodgers or the Padres or Major League Baseball overall made because they called a guy safe because the fielder was blocking too many centimeters of the second base bag on the first week. I do not understand what that did to grow the game, but that was when I saw that call. And then speaking of calls, but and I'll kick this over as a segue into March Madness, because we should talk about that. Obviously the first week of March Madness happened this past week. It was a very disappointing end to the season for my Seton Hall Pirates, who ended up going into the NIT. Now they're doing well in the NIT to start off, after almost losing their first game in that as well. But this game the other day, and I wish I could show video of it, because, there was a defensive play. A guy goes up. He's not blocking his hand is not on the hoop. His hand is not, his hand is just up, reaching forward, and, to attempt a block, and clean block. Everybody I've seen or heard on the media or fans or whatnot said it was a clean block, and he gets called for a foul. There's anybody I know who watches basketball religiously or hasn't watched basketball a day in their life was in agreement on this call. You can't get this many people in America to agree on anything, and they're all in unison behind this. I do not understand what is the allergy that these guys have to just letting plays happen. I don't understand why every game has to turn into a ref show, yet when you actually need a legitimate call to be reevaluated and sent back to, again, New York or wherever it is, all of a sudden half the cases it's like, oh, this is not reviewable. So we can wait 4 minutes to see if a ball wobbled 2 or 3 times in the NFL. We can wait 4 minutes for that, but a play that alters the course of a game that is incredibly consequential for both teams in their playoff hunt, that all of a sudden is like, oh, nothing we can do about it. Are you kidding me? Like, I don't understand that at all. But speaking of which, for those who are interested in that topic, I highly recommend tuning in the next couple of weeks. I've got some very exciting future guests that I'm working on trying to get onto this show, both pertinent to football and otherwise. So looking forward to sharing that with y'all. We've had a great slew of guests already so far, from Justin last week to, Kenny to Joey Clams. Had so many great guests on so far, Coach Brislin, and on and on. And I'm looking forward to who we have coming up going forward. All right. He is in the house. Mr. Keith Brugman, how are you doing? Says Mr. Scoops. How are you doing? So glad to have you on. Hope you had a great week. Did not get a chance yesterday to catch Denver Bronco Roundup, but I'm going to make up for that this coming week. And for those who haven't been on the show before, to hear me plug them, go to Facebook, YouTube, anywhere of their channels. The Rocky Mountain Sports Network featuring their show, Denver Bronco Roundup, Broncos content Tuesdays, Sundays, and I believe still Fridays, but you can correct me if I'm wrong. 7 o'clock Mountain Time, 9 o'clock Eastern Time. If you're not in either of those, you can do the math yourself. The fantastic Denver Bronco content. Again, I'm not a Denver Bronco fan. Absolutely love their show. Love the way that they conduct their show. I was fortunate to be on their show last month, and it was a fantastic experience. Great guys, great knowledge. Just highly recommend for anyone. So I'm looking forward to seeing what your guys do on with the 12th overall pick. I'm still plugging, as you know, the Bo Nix train because I don't think Jaden Daniels falls far enough. But I am curious to see if that's because I've seen a lot of traction actually behind that. And there's also a lot of smoke now behind McCarthy to the Giants at 6. So I don't know how far he falls. But I'm curious if, as to what's going to happen there, or do they go with someone like a Penix, or do they, either not go QB at 12 overall, try and move up? I don't know. You guys are one of the bigger wild cards in the draft that I'm very fascinated by. Excuse me. Especially in a season where, as you know, I identified, when I was on the show, I personally think that no one's under a bigger microscope in Denver this year than Coach Payton. So I think that this is somebody where, they brought him in as, the quarterback whisperer, the offensive mind guy, the guy who not only got the best out of Drew Brees, but the guy who was able to win with Taysom Hill and Jameis Winston. So time to see if he's either going to resurrect Jarrett Stidham, who has done, fairly nicely in some stretches as a starting, whether it goes back to New England and on, or whether or not they're gonna he's gonna be sort of the hold in while they wait to try and get somebody else in the draft. He says, I know you were frustrated with Hurts, so what do you think of Pickett? I don't think it's really the same conversation. Yeah, I was frustrated with Hurts, but I was frustrated with Hurts just because I thought that he would have such good games, and then these one or two decisions where he tried to be Superman instead of being comfortable being Clark Kent, and I was just like, why are you doing this? But I absolutely love Jalen Hurts. I'm 100% behind him as the QB. I think getting Pickett, I liked Pickett coming out of college, so getting him, I was excited. I think that he's a solid QB too. And I'm looking forward to seeing if he potentially could come to develop and take another level, whether it's for us to flip him later or whatever the case may be. So yeah, I was frustrated with Hurts, but as I said to I think it was Kenny who was the last person I had this discussion with. I mean, yeah, my frustration does not in any way make me believe that we should suddenly consider moving off of him for Pickett or anybody else. No, I still would take Jalen Hurts over all but maybe 3 QBs in the NFL. Now, I'm not saying that he's the 4th best QB in the NFL right now, but I'm saying I would take him right now over probably all but about 3 QBs in terms of going forward, not just right now, but long term. The PH Scratcher guy, how you doing? Speaking of Pennsylvania sports, good to see you coming in off of Kick. Says Pickett has potential, had a piss poor OC for most of his time in Pittsburgh. Say that 3 times fast. Yeah, very much agree with you. I can't remember his name. I think was that Matt Canada that everyone was, the Barbarians were at the gate about him finally getting let go. But I think that, again, like you said, I think Pickett has potential. I liked him coming out of the draft, but I was not, I wasn't, when he came over, and the way that I saw everything shake down, that happened so close to Justin Fields going to Pittsburgh. I think what happened is Philly wanted Justin Fields. I think they balked at the asking price and couldn't make a deal there. So I think they pivoted to Pickett, and then Fields went to Pittsburgh. Either that, or I did hear that Fields identified Pittsburgh as the team he wanted to go to. So Chicago did right by him, sending him to the Steelers, and then the Eagles pivoted to Kenny Pickett. Either way, I heard that there was just because of how close they were, and because I know that Fields was someone who interested Philly. I think that there was probably some chain of causality there. Not sure how close or how strong the correlation was, but I do believe that there was some. How big of a role does Hurts need to have without Kelce in the offense and in the locker room? I mean, as the QB, especially in Philadelphia, I think you always have to be striking that balance between being like the loudest voice in the room, but not the biggest man in the room, if that makes sense. Like you have to kind of swallow some of the greatness, I think you have to say. Like I said the other day, it's you fall on the sword when you lose, and you share the celebration when you win. And he's done that very well. He's his quote, which I absolutely love. His quote is, keep the main thing, which I absolutely love. I have it on my sticker on this my laptop here on this like digital sticky note thing, whatever it is. So I think he absolutely has to be a very impactful leader for especially the young guys. Now, that being said, I don't think that necessarily means he has to be the most vocal guy. I know a lot of people are saying, either he's too vocal or he's not vocal enough, which that's a really odd sort of duality to have, where you've got some people saying it on one end and some people on the other. But clearly there was something going on in the locker room this past year. Lane Johnson alluded to it. Several guys did, including, I believe, Kelce himself. So I want to see what that development looks like. Now, they brought back Chauncey Gardner-Johnson. Obviously, he's a defensive player, but they brought him back partially because they believe that he had a sort of a bite that was lacking in the locker room this past season. But yeah, I think that Hurts has to have that sort of presence about commanding the situation of the offense and in the locker room, but also not to the standpoint of like being that sort of puffing your chest out type of guy. Like you've got to have that balance, I think. And to what I've seen, I think he's done a nice job of it. I think he definitely feels like a Philadelphia quarterback. And I don't know really how to explain that other than just that's the vibe that I get from him. And I love his mentality and what he says at the podium every week. He always, I think, in my opinion, says what he should say. And I think he's not just doing it, politically. I think he genuinely believes, what he's saying. I don't think it's, just bluster and whatnot. But yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, you live and die with your QB as an NFL team, especially as an NFL offense. So, he's got to rebound this year. He can't be, making some of the mistakes I saw him make this year. But also, I think that the offense, from some of what I saw, I think the offense didn't always put him in the best position to succeed. And again, I know that the quarterback sometimes has to overcome some of that, but I think that there is blame to place on Jalen Hurts. I don't think that it's as much on him as some other QBs who have been at the center of lackluster offenses. I think sometimes there's more to the story there. It says, lastly, how do you grade your Eagles offseason? So obviously we haven't seen the draft yet, and there's still a month to go even before that. So it's definitely, I mean, the easy answer would be to say incomplete, but so far, I'd call it a B plus, maybe breathing into an A minus. And the reason why I say that is because I can't call it an A or better when you lose two of your four leaders in Kelsey and Cox. When you, are potentially going to lose a very impactful player, whoever that may be, off of your defense when you already lost a bunch of your defense last year. However, the moves that they have made, I love bringing back C.J. Gardner-Johnson. Not a fan of him personally, but I think he's a great addition for the defense that I think is desperately needed. I love the Bryce Huff addition from the Jets, especially if they let go of somebody like a Sweat or a Reddick. I think that he was somebody, if you probably remember, that I identified as a fit for your Broncos. So I was really psyched to get him, especially because he's one of the younger players who was available in general, particularly at that position. And then of course Saquon. I mean, I know that obviously running backs are really beholden to offensive line play, and I don't know obviously how the O-line's going to look without Kelsey there. I like the fact that we have Landon Dickerson there. I'm sure we'll draft somebody. There's a guy who's rising up boards who plays interior O-line who I think that we should potentially target in the end of the first round. Can't remember his name right now, but he's somebody that I would look at targeting at that 22nd overall pick. But so I can't put it super much higher than an A minus, just because again, you can't overlook the losses that they had, and because they still have several needs. But solid B plus, maybe into an A minus, depending on how you feel about certain elements. But also I think that I will say A minus, because what I neglected to mention there is the coaching changes that were made. I loved bringing in Kellen Moore as OC. And I think Vic Fangio, who we wanted as DC last year, had that whole disaster with Jonathan Gannon screwing us over, which I'm not going to belabor that point because I already have 1,000 times. So yeah, I'll call it an A minus because I didn't bring in the two coordinators to that before. Says, thank you for all your analysis. Great pod, my friend. Thank you so much, Keith. I hope you and your family, and of course everybody over at the RMSN family, from Mr. Dutchy to Jody, who I know just messaged me on Facebook a little while ago. I got to see what he said there. To Trevor and everybody else. I hope everybody's doing well, and looking forward to continuing to see what you guys have in store, not only regarding the Broncos, but some of the Rockies content that's going to be coming out in the near future now that baseball season is kicking off. So we got about 30 seconds left before the buzzer. That hour flew by. I feel like I say that every week, but it really did. So guys, thank you so much for coming on again. Again, I can't believe it's episode 19. This was one of our more active episodes from a viewer perspective. Thank you all so much for hitting those numbers. It's really grateful that you guys come on and have the engagement that we have. It's always fun hearing what people have to say or have questions about, or just come in wanting to share their own thoughts. So thank you all so much. We'll be back on. Finally, this is the last show where there's not going to be live baseball to talk about. So I'll be on next week in the middle of the first series between New York and Houston. That one's for Jody Moncrief. I'll be reaching out to him plenty this week. To the big Astros fan over there, our friend Jody. But guys, looking forward to it. Happy opening week, Major League Baseball. The Yankees went 82-80 last year. They don't have much room to go but up. So thank you guys. See you next week, March 30th. Same scoop time, same scoop channel.